So if you're joining us for this session, we've got some experts on the call that specialize in lots of different things, but I think everyone can probably answer all of your questions. Um, but we've got Adam
There's
Gray.
Sheldon.
Sheldon just joined us. He is the expert when it comes to judging and notebooks, as well as anything high school related. We had most of the people that signed up are IQ. So we do have a handful, I think, that might have some VRC questions. So we've got Sheldon on for that. We've got Dave Petty from Cold Spring on the call, Jake Simons. And I think I already said Adam Gray. So we want to make sure that you guys get all your questions answered. We know that you all have different levels of experience. Some of you, this is your first year. Normally we do this session earlier in the season and we designate it just for coaches that have been coaching for at least a year. This year we're trying something a little bit different, pushing it a little bit further into the season, thinking that this is probably about when when you're getting ready to compete. And so you might have, and you have some, maybe you have some building done and you might have some more specific questions that might need answered. So based on the Google form, there are a lot of questions. So if you guys want to just start firing away and maximize the time that you have with the panel, and then for the panel, you guys can jump in and
Right.
answer however you
Somebody sent me a question that might be good to start with.
Okay.
So it said, how much of parent assistance is acceptable for the elementary kids? Do you just expect kids to figure it out with the least amount of hands to help?
I can jump in on that because I have some overzealous parents.
Don't we all?
As we all probably do. So I do have a team meeting, as it says in the student policy, with parents, explaining that, it is a student-centered thing and kind of what that means. We generally don't let robots go home because we can't control what parents get too involved. However, if teams are doing that, I would highly recommend that you definitely have a whole group meeting, so you're not singling anybody out, because people can get defensive, and just basically say, hey, this is the student-centered policy. This is what it means to be overly helpful, and maybe even model what that looks like with last year's robot if you still have it together. And so you might be asking, what does that actually look like? Well, they can help assist with mechanisms. So if it's kids working on the robot and they're like, oh, I can't figure out how to do this, and you walk over and you basically say, what have you tried so far? And they can give you a list of things they've tried so far. It is acceptable for an adult then to kind of guide them through what might work. And trust me, the adult's not always right. I'm definitely not always right. I give them advice and then I walk away and I let them try that advice. And if they aren't capable of doing it, I check back in, after they've been toiling with it for 45 minutes and see if they did try what I was suggesting. And that's, modeling that. That's, if you aren't willing to spend that time with a parent, then I just wouldn't let robots go home. Others might have a different opinion.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And it's obviously different for school setting versus, private teams or whatever that are probably meeting at homes. But for me, I teach at an elementary school, and I'm also the director of 19 of our teams in our district at the elementary, middle school, and high school level. It's a fine line because we need parental help. We need as much assistance as we can get, especially at the elementary level. But at the same time, like David said, we know how some parents can be. They want their kids' teams to succeed. And so sometimes parents are a little bit more willing to maybe jump in a little too much. And so we don't let robots go home either. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, because you obviously have no idea what parents are doing with their kids at home. But two, remember the whole purpose of all of this, the overarching thing is to teach the kids the engineering design process. And if you have one kid taking the robot home and doing all the fixes and modifications and all that stuff, the rest of the team, however many kids that is, are missing out on that engineering design process. And so it hurts them in interviews. It hurts them in the documentation process if it's just one kid working on it with their parent. We have a meeting at the beginning of every season. I do with all the coaches. So we go out to dinner and I bring out the actual student-centered policy from the REC Foundation. I don't know, Jamie or Andy, if you want to link that, but it literally outlines every single possible scenario as far as what you are allowed to do as the coach or what parents are allowed to do when it comes to the design process, the building phase, the programming phase, even like during interviews and during notebooks. And so I think it's updated, but it used to have like green light, yellow light, red light. Red light is obviously like, no, that's no good. That's adults doing the work. That's adults doing the programming, adults coming up with the design ideas and all of that. And we certainly see that, right? Like we see that at competitions, and it's unfortunate, but what they do say, and what they at least did say, is that the yellow and the green is kind of where you want to be. And so in our district, at the elementary level, we talk to our coaches and the parents about being more in the yellow because they're brand new kids. And the rules in the game manual literally say kids are not born engineers, and there needs to be a level of adult interaction and coaching and teaching with that. And so at the elementary level, we tend to gear towards the yellow section. And then as the kids get more experienced and more confident and more comfortable in the building and the designing and the programming, then they kind of start gearing towards more the green, which is like all hands off. Now, I will say this, at the same time, I had a coach one time just say, you know what I do is I just throw all the parts on the table and just I sit back and grade papers and let the kids explore. And that's also, on the flip side, doing a disservice to your kids too. They're not learning anything. And this coach, God bless her, and I love her to death, she's also a math teacher. And I could kind of use the analogy of, as a math teacher, do you just give your students a bunch of numbers and then let them explore with those numbers? Or do you coach them? Do you guide them? Do you teach them through that process and what to do with those numbers? And so it's the same thing with robotics. We are coaches, and our job is to coach them through that process. We're not giving them the answers, we're guiding them. And I think that's an important distinction to make.
Tammy asked, what about drivers taking it home to practice driving?
I mean, I guess that's not a huge deal, but inevitably what's going to happen is they're going to be driving and they're going to discover some problems, most likely. And it's just kind of risky, right? Like, I don't know, Adam, you're kind of in a different setting than I am at the school, but plus I don't want people just taking robots home and breaking them in transit and stuff like that. So I know, Adam, you're in a different setting than I am in the school, but I don't know if you want to add to that.
I mean, there's a lot of things that could happen in that situation. The other thing you have to consider is that it's one thing to be able to drive the robot. It's quite another to be able to play the game with the robot. So if they don't have a field and the game elements and everything at home too, then just play Fortnite, like build some dexterity, like some other way. It's, they're not necessarily going to gain all the benefits of like actually playing the game with the robot if they don't have the game to practice with. So.
Hey, Jamie, I'll jump in here real quickly too. I mean, I think the question of bringing the robot home also depends on age and grade level. And as Adam said, if you have a field at home and can actually meaningfully practice, we find at the VRC level that it's important to practice at home because there's not enough time at school for a lot of the kids to get it done. But I think that taking that robot home comes with the responsibility that you take care of it and that you don't make changes without informing the team and involving them. So I think it's part of the development process to determine when the students are sort of ready to do that. And if you're comfortable with it as a coach, taking that risk of the robot leaving the building. But we find at the VRC level that the most successful teams all practice at home. And we worry about that because we worry about the inequity of that, right? And how there's a lot of time spent. And homeschool teams, for example, or private schools have an advantage if they can bring the robot home. So very complex, but we do see that it happens a lot.
There's also the potential risk of lending out school equipment to kids. So there may be some sort of policy against that. So you might want to double check before you just let kids take a few $100s worth of things home from the school.
Well, I'll say too, driving practice is incredibly important. I don't know if how your school is structured or whatever, but It's in my school setting, it's really convenient. My classroom just so happens to be one classroom away from the robotics room. And during recess, our kids voluntarily, our drivers voluntarily give up their recess and drive basically every day. So that's 20 to 30 minutes of drive practice every single day. That way they don't have to take it home. They don't have fields at home anyway, most of them. So that's an alternative as well. There's all sorts of alternatives to that, I think.
What other questions do we have? Maybe Sheldon, maybe it wouldn't hurt to talk a little bit about notebooks, especially like print versus digital.
Okay. That's a big topic right now. You know,
Yeah.
we had a move since COVID where we're seeing a lot more digital notebooks. And that comes with pros and cons. You know, certainly if you have a good sharing platform where all of the students can contribute to the notebook, it solves the problem we used to have with handwritten notebooks where one student would have possession of it and, you know, the others couldn't necessarily write in it. What we do find with the digital notebooks is we're finding a lot of copy and pasting going on with the notebooks. And so we worry about that. You know, we want what's in the notebook to be, you know, we want that to be an engineering document. We want it to be original design thoughts on the parts of the students. So, you know, really interested in hearing the students tell us why they made the decisions that they made. You know, not to say, hey, we chose this design because I went on YouTube and somebody else did that, but rather say, okay, our design priorities were to be fast or to be strong or whatever it is. And so that's why we did these things. We find the notebooks, again, I talked earlier about inequity. We find that there's a wide variety in the quality of the notebooks, the detail of the notebooks, and a lot of it has to do with how much time the students can spend, right? So we're you know, that's a problem we have to address, but we try to tell the students to take a look at the rubric. And again, if we're talking to elementary students, we would tell the coaches to take a look at the rubric, which is available. We can link to it here, and really look at what are they looking for in that rubric. And it's what I said earlier. It's how do we analyze the game? How do we decide what do we want our robot to do? And then kind of go through that design process. Jake, you might be able to talk a little bit about how you do it with your kids. And I know at the VRC level, that's very student-centered. You know, the students do the entire notebook. But I think at the elementary level, they need a lot more guidance on how to structure their notebook. Do you have thoughts on that, Jake?
Yeah, we spend the first, so we're actually in the midst of this right now. We spend the first couple of practices really pulling those documentation kids apart to the side. We have sub teams, obviously. I know that's pretty common verbiage, I guess, with a lot of experienced coaches. But for new coaches, every kid on the team has a specific role, and teams do that differently, and that's totally fine. But we have specific documentation kids who follow that process, and so. For us, oftentimes at the elementary level, where we have new kids every single year that we're trying to teach this process to. And so we start with a couple different lessons where we talk about the rules, the importance of the rules. And that's going to be one of the first things that you put in your notebook, scoring and just different important rules like that. And how those rules then allow us to come up with designs for that specific game strategies for that specific game. We can't come up with strategies without knowing the rules. Once we have a couple strategies in place, then we come up with design ideas, and we start with the drivetrain, and then we just cycle through this whole engineering design process. So we have the design, then we build it, and then we test it multiple times, and then we modify it to make it better. And so we just teach the kids that whole cycle of strategy, design, build, modify, test, modify, and just cycling through over and over and over again. We just have a big poster of that on our wall. And so that's literally the guide that they have through that. So the first maybe 2 practices, we're really hands-on with them. And when I say hands-on, we're not writing in the notebook for them. We're not telling them what to write, but we're guiding them through that process. And then it's pretty neat. After a couple of weeks of them, you know, studying that poster and going through that process multiple times, they are completely independent. And it gets to the point where, you know, I don't even look at the notebooks until we get to competitions. And then I'm always pleasantly surprised at the amount of content that they put in and the quality of that content as well. So there's definitely a lot of guidance at the beginning. We stay in that yellow, and then as the season goes on, it's that slow release. And I don't know. I would kind of miss the first part of that question, but I heard some talk of digital notebooks too. We're kind of staying away from the digital notebooks, at least at the elementary level. I know some of our middle school teams are going that way. But I think there's a lot of value in seeing the kids' handwriting and seeing the kids' sketches. One, I think that's cute. And two, it's authentic, right? And so it's really, 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 really hard to cheat as a coach with physical bound engineering notebooks done by the kids. And so, not to judge anybody who's doing digital, because I think digital is like, that's real world applicable. But I've had a lot of coaches, maybe not even from Indiana, just ask me if I can take a look at their digital notebook and just kind of inspect it and see. And it's just like, man, it's very, very hard to believe that a bunch of third and fourth and fifth graders did this notebook. It looked very, professionally done or adult done. And as a judge, you want to see those mistakes when you're looking at the engineering notebook. You want to see, not on purpose, but you want to see typos and misspellings and things like that, grammatical mistakes. And that just shows how authentic it is. So we've stuck with the physical bound notebooks for the authenticity of it.
So Jake, when you have if you go to an event where they require a digital version, you just scan it in.
Yeah, it's a pain. It's a total pain. We scan, there's an app. I think we use like the Adobe Scan app, and you scan every single page. And I'll do that. The kids don't need to do that, but I'll take a picture of every page and it scans it into a PDF file. And I think it gives like a shareable link. And then I think you just upload that onto your Robot Events account. And then at the event, they'll have access to that. So I think that's what they do at state and worlds, right? Like there has to be a link shared. So if you do a physical bound notebook, it's a pain, but you take a picture. And honestly, if you do it kind of throughout the season, because your engineering notebook is sequential, it should be in chronological order. If you just keep taking pictures as the season goes on, it's a whole lot less work at the end of the season. So you're not taking, 140 pages or pictures of 140 pages. So.
Yeah, and that is how we do it at state, and it's becoming much more common to do the digital notebooks. So the advantage of judging the notebooks digitally is that you can do it early. In fact, I've got notebooks for this weekend and next weekend that we're already looking at. So it frees up the judges on the day of the event to focus on interviews. So that's a real positive. The negative, as you said, Jake, is that it's harder in the digital format to tell, hey, yeah, I'm certain that these students did it. If it looks like a 10-year-old hand wrote it, it probably was a 10-year-old. But I've seen elementary school digital notebooks that I just flat out don't believe were written by elementary school students. Now I can't prove that, and I don't want to bring a tremendous amount of skepticism to the process, but it is difficult to understand what role the students played in the notebook. A couple other real quick thoughts on the notebook, and Jake, you made reference to this. We want to see mistakes, right? We're not looking for a polished presentation. We're not looking for something that's professional. We're looking for something that's real. So, I want to see things crossed out, and I want to see students say, we tried this, we tested it, and it just didn't work. And they can be very funny about the way they describe their failures, and that's important. If we see no failures in the notebook, then I'm not sure that we're seeing an authentic process, right? So that's very important. I'm with Jake. I much prefer the handwritten notebooks, but I also see the writing on the wall here. We are definitely moving toward digital. And it can be difficult. Another point real quickly about the link, Jake's exactly right. You come up with a link, you upload it to your Robot Events page, then the judge advisor gets a report for the event. We are supposed to be able to click on that link and it opens up the notebook. It's fairly frequent that it doesn't happen that way. And so then I have to email the coach and say, listen, your link didn't work. So highly recommend that you make sure that link will open with a single click, which is the standard. We really haven't gotten there yet in terms of really understanding this as a sort of a community. But make sure that your link works. It's pretty important.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, if you are a teacher at a school and your link works because you're in your organization and you've logged into like Google and you're using Google Slides, just at home on your own personal account, click on it. And if it works, then it's going to work for anybody. But if it doesn't work, if you're logged into your school account at home, it's still going to work. So just make sure you have somebody log in on their personal account. We had that one issue the very first time we did it. And then I don't know if you got from Jake's statement, but make sure that you help the kids format the book. And the only reason I say that is, you wouldn't expect them to write a 5-page paragraph or 5-paragraph paper without giving them the basic structure. This is how you write a sentence. This is how you turn those sentences into a paragraph. And then this is how you connect those paragraphs together to make a paper. So just make sure you give them some sort of basic structure. You don't even have to discuss the book in order to do that. You can use something totally different, or even last year's game as a model for walking them through how to structure, at least that, like Jake said, it's kind of a release, that first thing. We have not done that the last couple of years. We were totally hands off on the book. And we saw a huge decline. We gave them like examples of books that were online on the VEX site and said, this is the kind of the basic structure. We did do the rubric and walk them through the rubric. Like, these are what the criteria the judges are looking for. We use rubrics in our school, so we assume that, based on just going through the rubric, they would be able to then set up the design of the book or the format of the book. So just help them lay it out, at least at the beginning, so they have some sort of guide. Otherwise, it's going to be very chaotic in there, and a little bit of chaos, as being authentic, is fine. But it doesn't lead to them really being able to go back through the book themselves and follow their own process. And that's kind of the goal of the book, is for them to be able to follow their process. And then somebody else, obviously, to follow the process. But if they can't do it themselves, no one else is going to be able to do it either.
Yeah, I'll add to that too. We actually had an incident where we needed the notebook. We needed to go back and reference the notebook. This was probably 3 years ago now, or 4 years ago. One of my students was carrying the robot across our classroom, tripped over something, and it shattered into a million pieces. And they're all freaking out. This is like 2 weeks before the state championship, and they're all just like, the kids crying and everybody's just freaking out. I said, guys, just go grab the notebook, go back several pages and fix it and put it back together. And it was probably put back together in 15 minutes because their notebook was done so well. And that's, that includes the parts and the steps that they used throughout that process. And obviously tons of pictures to document that process too. So to answer Tammy's question in the chat, what about providing templates for the kids to fill out? Yeah, I mean, I think as long as the templates are like, we have strategy templates where it has like a picture of the field at the top, and then they just fill out their strategies and maybe potential problems that they might encounter. We have a template for like a meeting notes page that they fill out for each practice. But generally speaking, it's just a lot of sketching and taking pictures and jotting down ideas, with a little sprinkling of different templates, like I just mentioned, throughout.
And I added a link to the digital template in there. If feel free to click on that and take a look at the digital templates through Google Slides and PowerPoint.
You're muted, Sheldon.
Thank you. So the template that Jamie linked to is produced by the REC Foundation. So certainly that's approved to use. In terms of using sort of homemade templates, I would say this: the more advanced or the older the student, I think the less good that would be. So for elementary students, I think it's an excellent idea. At the high school level, would be a terrible idea. So I think it's kind of consistent with the idea that we're helping the students figure this out as time goes on, and by the time they get to the high school BRC level, their notebooks should be entirely their own work.
Another question, we'll shift gears here a little bit. What is the student to coach ratio that you currently have and that works for you?
Well, I have 7 teams. We just added 2 more. And I'm going to be totally honest, since we've added teams, we've had less success.
How many students per team, David?
Oh, how many students per team? 6 to 8, which again is a lot, but we have a huge demand. And so we were turning lots of kids away and they weren't making the team. And that was a little heartbreaking to me. So I'm somewhat sacrificing our success level for the engagement of more kids. But we're also trying to pull in more help. So it's taken us a while to get board approval, because that's just the way things work, slow. And steady. And so we finally have another coach who is more of an outside mentor. He's an engineer. He is a parent, but he's also he's an engineer. So he can bring a different level of understanding and more practical application. So that's where we're at. 6 to 8 kids per team with 7 teams. We have a total of 3 coaches with 1 kind of part-time who helps at actual tournaments.
Adam and Jake, do you guys want to share what yours is?
We have in Wani, we have 14 elementary middle school teams. And at the middle school level, we have a one head coach per team. At the elementary level, it's 1 head coach and several assistant coaches, 2, 3, 4 assistant coaches for 2 teams. And our teams at the elementary level have anywhere from 6 to 9 kids. And at the middle school, it's 6 or 7 kids, which again, like David said, is probably more than what they recommend. I think they recommend like 3 or 4 or 5 kids per team. But if you have a good enough structure and organization, then it's okay. You just have to make sure that you have tasks and objectives for every single kid. Like this year, I'm running 9 kids per team at the elementary level. That feels like a lot, and it is a lot. But we've structured it. I've done this before, and it was awful because it was way too many kids on a team. So, like David said, we have so much interest, and we're turning away so many kids. I think this year we had like 45, 50 kids just at my school alone try out to fill up 2 teams. And so I did 18 kids out of those 40, 45 kids, still breaking a lot of hearts, and it totally stinks. But at the same time, like I got to make sure that I'm okay as well, and I'm not getting burnt out as well. Last year I did 4 teams, and it just about burnt me out. So went back down to 2, decided to do 9 kids per team, 18 kids. And the way that I'm able to justify that is by creating more and more sub-team roles. So I have 2 kids on build and design team 1, 2 kids on build and design team 2, 2 kids on build and design team 3, and then that's 6 kids. And then I have 3 documentation students, 1 for each of those build and design teams, that follows their process and is able to put that content into the notebook. So so far we've been practicing for 3 weeks now. So far, all the practices have been, all the kids have been on task. I'm a little nervous about what maybe January, February might bring, but that's just kind of the goal is to constantly have tasks and objectives for them to do. So that's where we're at.
And I can give kind of the flip side of all of that. So I'm very different in a lot of ways because I primarily coach essentially homeschool teams. My wife coaches public school at Brentwood in Plainfield. And while she has 6 teams, I currently have 3. There was a possibility for a 4th, but doesn't look like it's going to work out. But I tend to try to be in the kind of 3 to 5-ish range. Although since my teams are kind of more specific to the kids that are wanting to be on those teams, I do have 2 2-person teams just because of the dynamics of those particular kids and their schedules. My other team is 4, and that works out fairly well. Again, having tasks for them to do is hugely important. At Brentwood, we've got I think 4 to 5 roughly on each team, and 6 teams. And they practice right now 2 days a week all together. Fortunately, we can split them up kind of between different rooms instead of having all of those kids in one room all at the same time, because that gets to be a little bit chaotic. But I tend to like the lower numbers. As far as ratio, we do try to have an adult with each team, whether that's a parent, a assistant coach, or just somebody to be in there to manage, basically just manage the time and make sure kids are on task, be able to answer questions or to ask the kids questions. A lot of times the kids get stuck, and if you ask them a question, it'll get them unstuck, or at least give them a direction to go in. So it's been really, really helpful to have like extra adult help if you can manage it. I know some schools it's not necessarily as easy as others, so that's been really helpful for us.
Great. I think we can shift a little bit. I just know like some of the things that I've been hearing from coaches specifically with this year's challenge and the Hero Bot. I don't know if you guys want to speak a little bit to what you're discovering so far with the Hero Bot and maybe some tips for the coaches on the call. And the coaches on the call, if this doesn't help you, please chime in because I don't want to waste your time. Make sure you chime in with whatever questions you have. I just know that's just something that I've been hearing a lot of chatter about from a lot of different schools. So if you want to talk a little bit about maybe both building and strategy with the game, maybe that would be a good way to shift to the next topic.
Well, I'll start off by saying the Hero Bot has never been out there to help you win a state championship or a world championship. It's supposed to be beginner level, and that's intentional. They're not going to give you step-by-step instructions for a state champion robot. So I will say this though, this is probably, and the other coaches can chime in if they like, but this is probably the best Hero Bot I think that has been put out, at least the most effective, especially compared to last year's. Last year's was like, it took like the whole minute to just suck up one disc and then possibly shoot it into the 2-point zone. So this year, like you could do some pretty good damage with the Hero Bot because it does intake 1 or 2 green blocks at a time. It might even be able to pick up purple ones. So it's a pretty decent starter robot, but it's important to recognize that it's just that. It's a starter robot. The cool thing about what VEX and the RC Foundation has done is they release these Hero Bots with the intention of you guys, I guess the kids, building them and then discovering maybe some issues or problems with it or some ways that they could improve them and make them more efficient. So what we always do, we have a summer camp every summer and we force the kids to build those Hero Bots at summer camp. And then if they have time, they can tear them apart and start modifying. That way, when the season begins, we're not starting with the Hero Bot. We've already built those during the summer camps. And we're diving into different issues that we've already discovered with the Hero Bots and improving our next iteration based on that. So like this year they have, the little tiny intake system, right? The kids very quickly noticed that if you widen that intake system a little bit more, then you can collect more blocks, or maybe deepen that bucket a little bit more and you can collect more blocks and get more points. And so it's important to recognize that Hero Bot is just a starter bot, and you should not start with that and end with that by the time you make it to the state championship or whatever.
Yep, I can definitely speak to it being a very capable starting point compared to some of the robots that we've had in the past. Not quite as good necessarily as what we had with Next Level, like way back. That one needed very few modifications, but this one, so my oldest son, this is his last year in IQ, built that over the summer, and he got to the point where he was scoring basically 70 points with it by himself in a skills run. And right now I think the highest driver skills score is like 116. So it's like you're not scoring like the best ever, but you're also not scoring like 10, so like the robot itself is definitely capable, and there's a lot of modifications that could be made. I'd say relatively simply, but I mean, that entirely depends on level of experience and everything. But just being able to hold more is kind of your first target on that. So in like last year, I didn't recommend anybody to build the Hero Bot. It just wasn't worth the time and effort. This year, I would say if you don't know where to start, that's a great starting point.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. Speed wise, it is super slow. Your kids are going to get bored with it. So if you don't know how to change the gear ratio for the wheels, that would be something to definitely research online. There are things out there. You can also contact me, or you can contact Jamie, and she knows how to get in touch with me. I'd be happy to have one of my kids Zoom call with you, or even just coach you through it, so then you can coach the kids through it. It's nice to be the authority in the room. And as they said, everything on this robot is definitely acceptable. The sensor, they're going to ask about this touch sensor. That could be for programming. It's definitely not necessary though. So they want to leave that off as they try to expand out the front to get, just a wheel here, another wheel here. Suddenly you get 4 blocks, and suddenly, as they said, with a little more speed, changing that drivetrain ratio, that you have a functioning bot at that point that can be very helpful to other teams. So yeah, this is definitely probably the best that I think that since I've been doing it since, when was my first one? Bank Shot. So way back when. So yeah, it's been a while since we had a good one, and this is definitely one of the better ones, because I think that kids should be able to figure this out as far as modifying it, even if it's their first thing. And if you have any questions, I mean, most of us that are on here, we're on here because we're willing to help. So just by all means reach out. Even if that means I've gone all the way out to Clinton to help the kids at their building sessions with South Vermillion. So I'm willing to I'm game and willing to help anybody who needs it.
I could be wrong. I think this year's HeroBot requires a Gen 2 competition kit. Is that right? So
Correct.
Yep.
Yes.
major disadvantage if you don't have access to Gen 2 competition kits, not even Gen 2, what is it, classroom kit or something like that.
Yeah.
You have to have like the four stack box in order for this to work. Obviously, if you don't have that, a great opportunity for your kids to follow the directions. And when they get to a part where they don't have those parts, then let's modify, right? Let's figure out a way to troubleshoot this and problem solve it. So a little frustrating that they that quickly required you to have Gen 2 competition kits for the HeroBots. But
It's also
Yeah.
the first HeroBot that requires 6 motors.
Oh yeah.
Well, but the Gen 2 kit on here really is just these hybrid gears. I don't know if you can actually see that in the camera. Is this hybrid gear here, the hybrid gear up here, and then these angle pieces which just control the sensor. So again, they don't need that sensor on there. That would be programming that you likely aren't going to get to anyway. So that
And the shock
just go-
absorber.
Yeah, that can just go away. And then the hybrid gears, you can just figure out a different way to actually motorize the chains. So that's really all that hybrid gear system is controlling. It just basically takes all that weight and puts it back here. You can have that weight out here and still have it be functional. So, and if you can't figure that out, by all means, reach out. We'd be happy to help.
You're muted, Jamie.
Thanks, Adam. Anything else on building? Any tips or tricks or any other questions? I'll tell you guys that Tech Point Foundation for Youth, I'll give you guys the inside scoop. We are working on maybe establishing like a building help hotline. So hoping that we can get that off the ground and have a way for coaches to schedule time with experienced coaches, hint, hint, some of you on the call, or teams that could offer, assistance, especially with our teams that are just starting out. We do have our coding help hotline. So if you're not taking advantage of that, we highly recommend using that. We can put that link in the chat too, to schedule time with the Purdue SIGBots. If you're having issues or need some help problem solving, they're not going to tell you what to do, but they're going to help guide you through the process to figure out your coding. You can set up time with the coding help hotline with Purdue. So thanks, Andy. That link is there for you if you want to take advantage of that. It's super easy. You just pick time on their calendar and it's just a 30-minute Zoom call. It's nice because you can share your screen and show them, like the kids can show them the code that they've already developed and they can kind of help them debug it. And sometimes they will share their screen and show them examples of different things. So definitely take advantage of that resource.
I would also just like to say about building, if you as the coach are not capable of building, you're not likely ever to be able to get kids who are going to be capable of building. So I would highly recommend, if you want to be a successful coach, that you spend some time building the various hero bots, if that's your starting point, because that might be like, I have no idea what I'm doing. That would be a good starting point. Building the hero bots over break, over the summer, whatever. That's a good foundation. They all teach different mechanisms and different building styles. As we've said, they're not great as a whole, but they are pretty good as far as teaching some mechanisms. And then building mechanisms for kids to learn, just like not necessarily even with the game. So we do a whole team meeting, all 7 teams sit down on the floor, elementary and middle school. And if I've built some sort of small mechanism model that could be used in this year's game, I present that to the whole group. I let them ask questions about how it functions. It's not on an actual robot. It is a standalone mini thing. And I say mini because I make it as small as I possibly can, so they can't actually put it into a robot. Our robots are always these big honking things that use all 6 motors and take up every centimeter of space that they can possibly take up. So by making it small, they can't actually then take that and immediately copy it on. So, just teaching them different mechanisms, whether it's a 4-bar lift, which you can look online to figure out how to build a 4-bar lift. Some of the Gen 2 kits, I've wanted to model how those parts should be used. So they have these little slide, like almost rack and pinion things. So I built a little sliding wall just so they could see how a sliding wall with a rubber band could adjust. Because, obviously you're taking in 2 different size parts. To model that, I used the pitching in ball and the bank shot ball. So they're different sizes. And so it's showing how 2 different size objects could be used with that wall. So just learning how to look at the directions and how to build that, and then maybe even looking on some YouTube mechanisms. YouTube shorts are great. There are a lot of YouTube shorts out there that show mechanisms. That's literally just like a 30-second video about how this one piece works. Those are great to show your kids. And they're also great as a coach to look and go, how did they build that? And to build that little mechanism just so you figure it out also. And then you can help guide kids that way.
Yeah, and I'll add too, as someone who's not mechanically minded, I've been doing this, I think, for 8 years now. And just a quick backstory, I had no idea what robotics even was 8 years ago, but somebody said that I should probably do it. And I said, okay, that sounds fun. And I did the training with Tech Point Foundation for Youth. But my biggest hesitation and my biggest fear was that I'm not a handy person. I'm not a mechanically minded person. And Adam can attest to this. I totally stink at the programming side of stuff. Like, I don't understand it. I still don't understand it. And I've tried and I've tried and I've tried. All that to say, there are so many resources out there. Like David said, YouTube is a huge, huge resource. And it's not getting on YouTube just to copy it, but it's getting on YouTube to be inspired by different ideas, right? And there's, I remember starting out 8 years ago as a brand new coach, so confused about everything, so overwhelmed about everything. I swallowed my pride and I reached out to a bunch of other experienced coaches who had been doing it for a few years. And I probably was annoying for a while because I asked a lot of questions, but I wanted to dive in head first and I wanted to be able to provide a great experience for my students instead of just saying, here's a table full of parts, explore. That's not doing them. That's just not fair for them. And so there are so many resources out there. YouTube is a great resource. Tons of experienced coaches are good resources. Don't contact me if you want any build or programming help, because I'm not good at that, but I am good at organizing things and the whole structure and sub-team and all that stuff, and willing to help out with that as well. So just wanted to I know, looking at the questions that Jamie sent to us ahead of time that people had pre-sent, there were a couple in there, like 2 or 3 that were like, help, I don't know what to do. There's so much to do and so much to learn. I'm just overwhelmed. Listen, we were there at the like 8 years ago. That was me. I was so overwhelmed, but you just have to be willing to ask a ton of questions. And you'll get there.
And to follow up on that, Jake, one of the things we've observed as well is that this is a multi-year kind of thing, right? It's very unlikely you're going to start a team this year and win the state championship, right? But over the course of 2, 3, or 4 years, the students can learn a ton. So I think if we encourage them, to kind of do what's within their capability, it will build over time. I think they put the time in, they'll get better.
Adam, the links that you put in, I know the first one, obviously. What are the next two that you put in?
So the next two, both Robot Educate REC Foundation and VEX themselves have created these knowledge bases, and they just have a search bar at the top. Now, they might not give you everything that you need about the information you're looking for, but a lot of times when we're not really sure how to find what the answers to our questions, it's because we don't know the words to use. Like, I need a mechanism that does this, and like, how do you search for that? Having like these knowledge bases available, like they just have mechanism sections. So that's one thing that you can go through and look, and they've got resources in there. Robot Events specifically has resources in there about the competition and judging and interviews and like everything around the whole process. And then VEX themselves, their knowledge base includes things like resources about how to use the parts. Like we just had a pneumatics kit come out. So the pneumatics kit comes in the box and it's just the parts, no instructions, no names on anything. Like I've got one, I can bring it out, but like, how are you supposed to know that this thing over here is called a solenoid? Like, it's not labeled. So use the knowledge bases. Another thing that you can do that I've even been doing over the last year that kind of AI has sort of taken off. ChatGPT does not judge you when you ask dumb questions. And a lot of times it can tell you like how you should have asked the question. It can tell you some of the words that you need to use. Like if you just tell it like, hey, I need a mechanism that does this, and it will like in a roundabout way get to finally what you're actually asking and provide some information that you can maybe use as search terms for asking better questions and finding those videos of mechanisms on YouTube. So
I have to be honest, all I put in is VEX IQ full volume. I go to the little filter and I just do this year.
yeah,
And it literally kicks up all kinds of videos. And then after I've, to be honest, looked through every video, then I just go back on a weekly basis on Sunday and I look for this week or this month. I forget which one it is, this week or this month. And it just filters out everything else. And I can only see the new videos. I'm that nerdy.
I just sort by latest release and just look at the top. So but yeah, that's good to see what other teams have been doing that they're sharing that's out there. A lot of competitions are streaming the competitions now. So if you have a chance, like you don't need to sit and watch like the whole 8-hour stream, but like go to the finals and watch the last couple of finals matches on any of the streams from events that have happened. You'll learn a lot from that.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes left. Last chance for any specific questions. If there are none, then I would say let's use our last 5 minutes to hear some of your tips about fundraising and how you fundraise your program, because obviously it gets very expensive as you add more teams, especially. So I'll keep an eye on the chat, but if anybody wants to say anything about fundraising, I think that was the only other topic that we have not covered yet that we had some questions about.
I just let Jamie and George talk to Microsoft.
Well, I'll say there was a pitch that followed ours, and I was like, oh, dang it. They're not going to give us any money after the last pitch. Because it was Tim, the Titans player with ALS.
Mm.
It was touching. It was like everybody was crying. I was like, take all of our money, just take it all. But no, we're trying. We're really trying.
I'll just jump in and talk about our funding, because it is definitely the biggest thorn for me as the director of our district, because we have so many teams and robotics is expensive. And the further you go in the postseason, the more expensive it gets. Worlds alone, that I don't know if you guys saw this, just raised their Worlds registration cost to $1,800 per team, which is just crazy. last year we sent 14 teams. So do the quick math. That's a lot of money that we have to raise, plus getting kids down there, plus state registration fees and parts and jerseys and all that stuff, bus transport, all that. So our budget, we have to raise anywhere from $75,000 to $90,000 a year for our entire district. I know that sounds pretty daunting. If you're just running one team, it's definitely nowhere near that. But we have to get pretty creative with raising that money. We kind of do it in 3 phases. The first phase is the sponsorship phase, and we just actually wrapped that up like 2 days ago. We have to get board approval, obviously superintendent approval, to send out sponsorship letters, but we basically just send these letters out to all of our local businesses. And it helps that we've had a lot of success in our program. And so a lot of the businesses want their name to be tied to our program. And so we put their logos on our jerseys. We started something new this year to incentivize it a little bit by letting them know that we could put their logos on license plates and then put those license plates on our robots, kind of like NASCAR does, with all the different logos on their cars. But we just have different incentive levels for businesses. We live in a very, very small rural community in Napanee up in northern Indiana. And we just closed our sponsorship application deadline yesterday, and we finished with 45 local businesses for $26,000, which is just like absolutely insane. And it just blew me away, but it was a huge testament to the support of our community. That's phase 1. Phase 2 then is fundraising. Obviously, nobody likes to fundraise. I always ask the parents at all of our parent meetings, like, raise your hand if you want your kid to participate in fundraisers, and it's like 0, like nobody raises their hand. The kids are required to do a lot of fundraising through other avenues in school and all that anyway. So people just have kind of a bad taste in their mouth about fundraising in general. So we just do one fundraiser. We call it the state tune-up, which is something I created a few years ago, and I'll get to that in a second. But if parents don't even want to participate in that at all, they don't want to do any fundraising, we offer an option to buy out, and they just write a check to our program for $250. And that just bypasses the fundraising efforts that their kids have to do. So we've raised a lot of money just with the buyout option. And then we do what's called the state tune-up fundraiser, which is we always schedule it for the Saturday before the state championship. And we open up one of our gymnasiums from 9 a.m. and we close at 9 p.m. It's a super long day for us, but it's a chance for kids to spend as many hours as they want from that 9 to 9 time frame, fine-tuning their robot, fine-tuning their notebooks, working on interviews, working on driving practice with all of our district teams. It ends up being a pretty fun day. We get catering for lunch and catering for dinner, and all of our kids in the district are there and collaborating, which is ultimately what we want to see anyway. But basically it's like a walkathon, except they're not walking laps. They're getting pledges for the number of hours that they're going to be working on their robot fine-tuning that day. So it's obviously twofold. 1, we raise money, and 2, it's a last-ditch effort to just fine-tune everything before the big state championship the following Saturday. I think we raised like 10 to 15,000 of that last year. And then our last phase is if we have any teams that qualify for the world championship. In between the state and the world championship is kind of that 1 to 2 month gap or whatever it is. And we have just a big community, celebration trivia night where businesses buy tables and eat a nice meal and have drinks and do an auction. And again, last year we sold out. I think we had 350 people attend that. And at events like that, especially events that benefit kids, a lot of people are willing to just throw their money around, right? And so I think we raised like $35,000 last year doing that event. So between the sponsorships, the fundraising, and then we call it the gearing up event, we are able to raise enough money. I would say if you have a smaller program, maybe 1 team or 2 teams, just have your kids be in front of a couple of businesses and kids sell, and just kind of have them outline some of the costs that they need for jerseys and extra parts or Gen 2 competition kits or registration fees. And if you just kind of outline that in front of these businesses, they are more than happy to cut a check for $500, $1,000, $1,500, whatever. throw their logo on your jersey or throw it on a banner that you put in your pits during competitions, and everybody's happy. So that's kind of what we do to raise a bunch of money every year. I don't know, Adam or David, how you guys do it, but that's what we do.
We try to be 1 or 2% of what you do. One of the things that we do is restaurant nights. Local restaurants, they do them for all sorts of things, and they're usually happy to do them. And like, they don't bring in, $10,000-$15,000 in a single, Saturday, but it's a pretty easy way to make, $200-$300. You can cover, if you've got 6 teams, it might be an easy way to cover competition registration, for one competition for all your teams. So you do enough of those throughout the year. But mostly, like, the biggest thing so far has just been ask, especially the local businesses. If you've got local businesses nearby, I know some don't, some are even more rural than Napanee. So that can be a little bit difficult, but a lot of times just asking is like, walk down to a car dealership and like, hey, yeah, sure. Here's $200. Here's $500, whatever. And don't be afraid to ask for a lot. If you think it's a lot, try anyway. Like, the worst they say is no, and you're no worse off than you were before.
Yep. And I would say I just basically went to my administration and said, I'm going to do robotics. I'm going to put everything I have into it to be successful. I need you to do the same. And it took 3 years, but I don't have to fundraise. They put it directly into the budget. They have $50,000 slotted for ours. It was 5 teams, right? I don't think all 7 will possibly get to World, especially the cut of numbers. But they got $50,000 built into the budget. It's literally just there for us to use. So our 7 teams are fully funded, and I don't have to do anything and worry about that. Now at the beginning, yes, we had to go to the local businesses. We did candy bar sales twice a year and everything. And then we went to Worlds. We found a little bit of success. Obviously we found success at state. And they committed at that point. So, yes, put in the hard work early, make sure that you're putting in enough work and the kids are putting enough work to find some success. And you might be surprised, how your administration reacts to that, because having an academic program that is more valued than your sports program is phenomenal.
Yeah, that's a major blessing, David, that that your district sets aside $50,000. That's awesome. I mean, our administration sets aside no money for that. They're super supportive in other ways. But yeah, $50,000, man, that's huge. That's a whole teacher salary, man.
Yeah, well, I feel
kind of almost.
I feel like I work 2 jobs a lot of times, so that's
Well, I think that's very inspirational, David, because I think that's what all of us want, is for our districts to recognize the value of robotics and to see just how important it is, and elevate it to as high, if not higher than sports. So that's exciting to hear. And since we're 4 minutes over, I'll go ahead and just say thank you so much to the whole panel for giving up your time, answering questions. And when they say they're available to answer your questions, they mean it. They're the robotics community, although competitive, I would say way more collaborative than competitive. And it's such an amazing community, and everyone just wants to see everyone else be successful. So make sure you reach out and ask questions. The Facebook group, if you're not in the Coaches Corner Facebook group, I think all of these people are on that group. It's a great place to ask questions and get support. So make sure you lean on that as well. And of course, you have myself and Andy, the rest of us at the foundation. Our goal is to make your robotics season as fun and easy as possible. So whatever we can do to make that happen, please make sure you reach out. We'll have this recording on the robot resource page on our website, so you can access it later if you need to go back and reference anything. But thank you for what you do every day, because you're changing lives literally every single day by providing the opportunity for students to participate in robotics. So from us, we just say thank you so much for your continued efforts and commitment, and hope you guys have an amazing night and a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you.